Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way. And it is excellent to have you along the way with me right now, and I hope to have it in the future. Therefore, if you like this right now, click follow, click subscribe on whatever podcast app, puller, downerer that you have in your hand or on your computer right now. That would be really awesome, because you don't want to miss any more of these mysterious obsessions as we explore Cirque du Soleil, that I am in it sometimes and that Jay has seen it more than what's cool to admit. We are delving further and deeper into what Mystere is and into the thoughts that me and Jay Gilligan have about it. But of course, the expert here is the man that has seen it 84 times live. He saw it within months of opening, as we're going to explore a little bit today, I believe. And without further ado, because we already talk a lot about everything, then I'd just like to get cracking straight into the episode with Jay Gilligan and the Mystere Obsessions, Part 2. We are back for our second talk about Mystere. I was just listening to you and me talk, and I loved just this beginning of where you are sketching out where you were at in the late 80s, early 90s. Because I was in Norway then and in an absolute vacuum. So I came to these things later, probably not until, I don't know when it was, but I saw my first live Cirque du Soleil show in 1996.
Oh, wow.
So I had seen it somehow before.
And which show was that?
That was Saltimbanco.
Great.
Me and a friend who were doing street shows found out that Cirque du Soleil was playing in Belgium, and we had been performing in Copenhagen on the street, and we went, they are playing there at this time, so we drove to Belgium to see the show. And it felt huge. It was amazing, like a big event in our lives. We both loved what they were doing, and it was absolutely the biggest thing. But maybe because I came from Norway and I didn't know anyone and whatever, my thing was on the outside looking at it, like as if I was looking at a Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
I was really deeply into horror film at that time, just before, and I'd been interested specifically kind of in splatter movies with lots of effects and blood and all this. Yeah. And I wanted to write my last year assignment about extreme visually graphic horror film, splatter movies, with effect-based movies, special effects and stuff. And we had made some of those little things, but I never in my mind dreamt that I could make a movie like Star Wars or whatever.
Yeah.
But I could just about imagine that I could make something as Evil Dead by Sam Raimi or Bad Taste by Peter Jackson, their first movies, where so they're just within a large production of what we thought we could do with or whatever.
Yeah.
But when it came to circus and magic and stuff, and I would not even know how to approach these kinds of show. My thing was so folk circus, like my folk circus with my dad doing magic. We went into folk circus doing street shows, and we were doing street shows, and we used the money that we made on the street to travel to see this show. But I never imagined that I could be in it. So it was really exciting to hear it from you, who was in North America, which was, of course, a key component. This happened in a continent that I had never been to. I wouldn't be on until for another 10 years. I saw a show in 96, went to Las Vegas first time in 2006.
Okay.
Did I? Yeah, I did, yeah.
Great. Nice.
No, didn't go to Las Vegas in 2006. Went to America for the first time.
Okay.
To New York 2006.
Okay.
Yeah. To perform. So it was really nice to hear you just talk about how you were there and your duo was pulled apart.
Yeah.
So it was great to have that personal way into it.
I mean, that's going to come up again later, but this idea of what you were just talking about of, I could never make the movie Star Wars. I mean, I was a teenager when we're talking about Nouvelle Experience and this and that. and Saltimbanco and Mystere and all those things. And I didn't understand at all how the world worked, but I did understand the agency I had in my own practice to learn new juggling tricks and to invent new patterns, and to also on a very small scale. I was performing when I started performing when I was 8 years old. So I had opportunities to express myself on stage, and I know I had a little bit of a process around how I would make my performances. Like I knew I had the power in myself to present my show how I wanted to. But that was a very limited scope of understanding. And then when I would look at Cirque du Soleil, like Nouvelle Experience, I mean, they have their own tent. They have their own, how many people are in the show? 40 people are in the show or something. It was incomprehensible to me, but I was also conflating a lot of stuff into each other, where I was just like, well, I just need to practice more, because that's like the one thing I could do, right? I could practice more. I could learn more skills or more tricks or something. But I didn't know how to necessarily negotiate a contract or balance a spreadsheet or make a budget or gather a team, like all these very important woven into the fabric of how do you make a show with a tent and 40 people, right? That just I couldn't comprehend it. Still to this day, I can comprehend the mechanics of how that works. I would not have it inside of me to start a company and to be able to go out and make a company like that. Mm-hmm. And just a little sidetrack, just to say, when I was young, my dream was to have a company for many years. That was kind of the goal of a lot of people, I think, in America in my generation, was like, once you get big enough, you would maybe start to have a little troupe of performers that you would all make a show together and kind of make a company. And that was definitely a dream for many, many years. And then at some point that fell away, where it's like, no, I don't want to have a company. I want to just do my own work and collaborate. I mean, obviously I collaborate with a million people like you, but I don't have my own core company of an office full of people and a whole creative team and a whole bunch of employees. I don't have that. And famously, all of the Seven Fingers, because I worked with them, and that's like literally having 7 different bosses. And one by one, they all took me aside at some point and was just like, the biggest mistake we ever made was to make a company, meaning that they, from their side, the grass is always greener. Oh, what a challenge it is to have a company, and don't you fall into the same trap we fell into. Whereas I'm on the other side of the fence, and I'm looking to their company and being like, you have a team, you have camaraderie, you can support each other, and I'm here all alone, and I'm lonely sometimes, and I'm struggling, and I don't have all the skills necessary. So I don't know, there's always that kind of reciprocal view. And the other thing, while we're talking about it, because I think this is fun and also crazy, and I never told you, but when I was a teenager, I was so obsessed with practicing that for me, the payoff of all the practice wasn't doing the show. The payoff was I got to do something new. I got to learn a new skill or make a new pattern or create something and that for me, that was fun. And going to do the show was fun, but it wasn't as fun as in rehearsal. The show was never as fun as being in rehearsal. The first moment of rehearsal, when you first discover that new trick, you go, oh, there's a new idea I never thought of before. That's the moment that was gold. And then after that, you had to work. You had to work to make it real and to make it, you could catch it every single time. So many times when I was in high school, 17 years old, I mean, I was doing shows for like $600 a pop, which, this is back in the early 90s. And today I would do a show for $600. Absolutely. That's not a bad pay, even in today's market. And so and it was like a half-hour show. Like, hey, I was selling a half-hour show locally in Ohio, or, around my parents' house. I would just drive out and do the show or whatever for private family events or for Cub Scout banquet or Halloween parade or whatever, right? And many times I remember now, I was in high school, I would get a phone call, and I had an ad in the phone book. It was the Yellow Pages, which was the commercial, the commercial phone book.
Santini's magic show was also in the Yellow Pages.
There you go, and that's how you marketed yourself. And I would get a phone, and so you have your phone number. I would get a phone call. My mom, Jay, the phone's for you. And I would answer the phone, and they're like, hey, yeah, so we're doing a baseball banquet for our team, next Friday at 7 p.m. Can you come do the show? We have a budget of whatever, $500. And I would frequently be like, no, thanks. Because in my mind, I'm like, oh, if I do that show the day before, I'm going to have to practice the show, and that means I can't do new stuff.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to have to drive there, and then my Friday practice time is gone, and I might be more tired on Saturday. I can't practice as much that day. I would just turn down gigs, man.
You're a practice junkie.
And
you were into the new as opposed to into a crafted experience that happens between you and an audience.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I was into that, but I was more into the other thing, right?
Yeah, but that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like you were more into the new than you were into the experience of it or whatever.
Yeah. So now looking, I mean, and especially in the recent years following that time period, I would kick myself frequently when I had to pay my rent. And I was just like, man, 4 years ago, I wish I would have taken more of those gigs. Could have saved some money. But no, it's just funny though, right? Like to think of that today, to be like, if you get a phone call for a show and you're just like, no, if I go to do a show for you Friday night, like I can't practice then. And so that's kind of fun. But that was the mentality I was in at the time when I was encountering all these things of nouvelle experience. And there's another really important cultural thing to weave in here that we have to mention, which is that I was a juggler. I started off doing unicycling, and then I did juggling. That was my identity. And if you dared say I did circus, you were wrong. I did not do circus because I was in America. And in America, we wanted to get away from the circus. The circus was Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. It was red noses on clowns and sawdust and elephants. And so that's why Cirque du Soleil was so appealing, right? Because they were counterculture to that circus image. That's what they were marketing themselves as. That's how they were spreading the awareness around. And so that really spoke to me, right? Because me and all my friends, we didn't want to be circus because that wasn't a thing in America. Whereas I think in Europe, for example, there's more of a lineage of the history of circus. I mean, countries here are older than the American country, as a nation. And so then you have more of a connection to your history. And clearly, when I came to Europe, eventually it was really clear, I'm doing circus.
Yeah.
Like juggling is part of circus. Circus is the larger umbrella. Then you start to learn about Philip Astley, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And you go, I'm doing juggling, which is, whether I like it or not, is undeniably under the umbrella of the genre of something called circus. That's just how the world works.
Yeah.
But when I was in America, in Ohio, growing up as a teenager...
Yeah, it's like saying, no, I'm a painter, I'm not an artist.
Yeah.
Like where you go,
right.
That's... okay, maybe you have some point, but to anyone else... Or my famous story of walking with my friend and meeting someone and they go, who's your friend? It's so-and-so. And do you also do circus? No, I do neo vaudeville.
Right.
Okay, and I say, he does circus.
Yeah, exactly. Sure.
Because it's like, anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. No, but that was really woven into the fabric of life at the time, of this idea of like, this American idea of at least with my circle of friends, we're not doing circus, we're doing juggling, that's something else. We're doing unicycling, that's something else. It wasn't sports, but it wasn't circus in the American traditional image. Yeah. And then Cirque du Soleil comes along and they're like, hey, we're doing circus, but it's not American traditional image. And I'm just like, huh? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Right? And that really spoke to me. And so I couldn't kind of comprehend the leap between where I was and what they were doing, but it was very attractive. Kind of what you were saying about yourself making films and Star Wars and whatever. And if we can kind of since we're already there, we could dive into that a little bit deeper. And this idea that when Mystere came around, we already mentioned previously of like the risk they were taking, that it was the first permanent show and the first permanent theater, custom-built theater, and all these
big-scale circus show in Vegas.
Yeah, and they had
completely breaking new ground for what was acceptable performance or what was possible to do as performance.
A bunch of unknowns.
Yeah,
a bunch of unknowns.
They were stepping into the mysteries, into the unknown.
And so we can talk a little bit more concretely then about what the show actually is, but also I want to frame that with this idea of not understanding how the world was back then. Like, I mean, in today's view, from today's view, looking backwards, like, even though I lived through it, you lived through it, I think it's so hard to, in one way, remember what things were like back then, but also, even if we remember what they were like, how to communicate that to the people around today who didn't experience it. It's really hard to imagine, first of all, in one way, the world before the internet if you never experienced the world before the internet, right? That's like one challenge we have.
It's right on the cusp of being before mobile phones.
Yeah.
That you actually had a phone that you could call.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I maybe got my first mobile phone in 94 or something.
I didn't get mine until 2001 or something.
Yeah. And that wasn't a smartphone. That was just a phone that I could call, and it was because I moved away from home, and they wanted me to have a phone because they knew that I wouldn't have the money to have a phone in my apartment. But I had it, and I never used it.
Yeah.
Because it was so expensive.
Yeah.
You could, but I had one, and it couldn't text. It couldn't do nothing. It was just a phone. So we're in a time that's hard to imagine.
So that's a perfect example. Because I think we have today in our information age with mobile smartphones and internet and stuff, that's an easy example in one way to talk about, hey, this is the time even before mobile phones, before smartphones, mobile phones. So now we're trying to talk about something even more hard to encapsulate, which is the state of performance of circus at the time.
Yeah.
Like how was circus back then? And so...
Yeah, because now we have circus, but then we have... Oh no, I do Cirque, and that's almost a thing now.
Oh yeah.
You go, oh okay, so then it's this type of thing. So they have broken open the mold and reinvented the circus, but it has
well, a couple things on that, right? Like we were talking about the word immersive before, and nowadays everybody has in their marketing text the word immersive, because that's just like a buzzword that they think is going to sell. It's going to speak to certain whoever's whatever is going to connect to them. And it's the same thing with Cirque. That's what happened in North America. Cirque du Soleil became a thing. It became a cultural phenomena. So suddenly, to align yourself with them, you would use the word Cirque, and you got Cirque productions, and you got Cirque holidays, and Cirque this and Cirque that, Cirque mechanics, and
Cirque Noir, Cirque New, Cirque Nouvelle, whatever.
But like company names like Cirque.
Yeah, that's what I mean too, as well.
Yeah,
like I think Cirque Noir is an actual show.
Okay, yeah. So I think this word Cirque became kind of ubiquitous just through this kind of emulation of like, oh yeah, Cirque Dreams was a company back then too, and it became this like, oh yeah, we want to align ourselves with this kind of branding, because what really happened with Cirque du Soleil, and we don't need to get deep into this, we can mention it, but like they just invented their own category, they invented their own genre of entertainment, and like in the end of the day, that's what they did. Like they really. That's kind of hard for them because they made their own category. Like they weren't doing traditional circus, they weren't doing opera or ballet or whatever. They became Cirque du Soleil. Kind of it was his own thing.
Their own conglomeration. Just like when you go to a traditional circus, and that feeling of what that is, it's a style of presentation as well. And which is different from what you see in a freak show or a sideshow, and it's different from what you see in an opera. And they have also using music, so they're using the ears, eyes, and mouth, and all of those things.
So
they're presenting it in a different flavor.
Cirque du Soleil really positioned themselves that they were doing some sort of cutting edge, really far out, really exploratory, new kind of thing. And again, that really built on their early platform of we don't use animals. At the end of the day, if you sit down and examine what you were saying before about the structure and mechanics of Mystere, or Saltimbanco, or Allegria, or Quidam, it's traditional circus, but dressed up in contemporary costumes and contemporary music. But the staging the rhythm is the same. It's like act, transition, act, transition. It's not deconstructed. Like if you get into the real contemporary circus of like France, like French circus at the time, Archaeos or whatever, or whoever else, that was real. Like you're starting to meddle with the fabric of the actual performance itself in terms of deconstructing and whatever the rhythm of the whole piece or whatever. At the end of the day, Cirque du Soleil is pretty like Saltimbanco. You have the Russian swing act, and then they land and go hippa, but they're all looking crazy, and they have these worm costumes. They were called the Worms, and blah blah. They have this little storyline of the urbanites and the whatever. But like at the end of the day, it's pretty close to the structure of a traditional circus. But Cirque du Soleil made its own category of we can say entertainment or art or whatever you want to say.
A particular brand of experience.
Thank you. Exactly. A product.
But also like a kind of experience and what to expect within that. So they gathered all the different arts and circus and all these things, but they marketed it in a new way, and that was transferable from show to show, so you could immediately look at it and go.
And I think
at one picture, and you go, it's a Cirque du Soleil show.
And I think in one hand that was their challenge too, that they invented this category and then they were kind of siloed into that, and they're just like, oh, this like, where do you go from there, right? And that's their struggle today. But
the difficult second album. Are you going to make more of the same, or are you going to go into a completely different direction? And will your audience go into a completely different?
No, exactly. And then now today they're making Perfume, and then they have the show Run in Vegas that closed in 4 months and whatever, and they have the Netflix TV show Luna Petunia, and they have a Roblox video game, Cirque du Soleil, blah blah. Like, it just endless. Like, anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But just to say, like, what we were talking about back when Mystere came around, it's really hard to communicate how the world was back then in terms of the performing scene, and it's also hard to communicate how big of a change that Mystere brought to the entire industry, or the entire, at least the circus world of, and I don't know about production shows, like potentially Mystere did a bunch of groundbreaking things that had never been done in live performance before. I'm not so sure about that, but I do know the combinations of things that Mystere brought to the stage, and especially in the genre of circus, was groundbreaking, never done before, and it kind of changed the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those things are.
Cool.
And so, like, for example, overall, the result of that was that it established a format, and it became, because Mystere did become successful commercially. Suddenly, there was a point in time when every single casino on the Strip was going to have a Cirque du Soleil show. That's not hyperbole. That was literally the plan, like, for many years. And they started to build it out, right? Like, at one point, Soleil had 8 shows on the Strip. And that became its own game of cannibalism, of how do you grow from there, and how do you differentiate this show from that show. It's all the Cirque du Soleil name, and we've had all those struggles over the years with that kind of branding. But just to say, Mystere established that format of a long-term residency show in a custom-built theater that had a theme and kind of had a core identity. And also, one of the things that happened in Mystere was, in terms of that format it established, it kind of threatened the status quo in Vegas at the time, because you were talking earlier about, like, Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack, or kind of this humanistic performing of it's on the human level, on individuals and on faces and names and connecting in that way. And Mystere really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way who were established performers in Vegas, because it was the first time they kind of made the performers anonymous, and it wasn't about the individual, it was about the whole, right? And you just became a cog, a little gear in the mechanism of the whole show. You became anonymous. You were replaceable. You were teeterboard jumper number 7, and you could be gone tomorrow, or you could be someone else, like, the next day or whatever. Like, it just didn't really quite matter in that way. And so a lot of performers at the time, in Vegas, but also around, like, in my circles, they kind of hated Mystere, because they were just like, oh, that's not real performing. And that it also threatened them. And it was also hard for them to relate to, because they're just like, yeah, but these people on stage, they're not stopping to take applause. It is the micro-motion 12-minute long piece of, like, they're not stopping to go hippa and, like, asking for applause and styling and hitting a pose. And that was so the antithesis of a lot of what people thought was performing, or at least good performing. And so they're just like, man, this Mystere show sucks. Like, they're not actually performing, and you don't know who the performers' names are, and I'm not engaged in this. I'm not drawn into it. And the other aspect of this alienating, I'd say, the performing community, if it did alienate you, was this Franco Dragone technique of staging other characters around the stage during a featured act.
Yeah.
Which happened in Saltimbanco, it happened in Unveiled Experience. I mean, again, it was always an evolution. It was there from the core of the Soleil DNA, I think, as they were starting off. But in later years, like Nouvelle and Saltimbanco and Mystere, they could really just go for it and manifest that. It's like so much bigger in real life. And so Mystere was just the next level of, like, the great example is, after you have the opening of the Charivari, which we have to talk about, we get back to, then it was Baby Francoise with the Red Ball clown act. And
big
then
baby.
A big baby, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a big baby with a big red ball.
Yeah. Big. And then it was the micro motion piece. But then after that, there's a little transition, and then there's Chinese pole. Well, a great example of this idea of these alienating staging aspects to traditional performing people was that you have your double level, by the way, Chinese poles in the front of the stage on the thrust. And then in the back, at one point during the beginning of the piece, there's literally a line of 20 Chinese poles descending from the ceiling with like 20 Chinese pole performers back there. It's just on a scale you can't imagine.
And it's hanging in the air.
Yeah.
So it's up so high. It's
just coming down from the like out of the ceiling, 20 more Chinese poles. And so then you can imagine that these, for example, a performer who's used to being on a microphone and talking to the audience, hi, my name is Jay, and I'm a juggler, and blah, blah, blah. Suddenly you're in this, first of all, this immersive theater that's built around you that has this imagery and symbolism of, there's a map on the ceiling and stuff. It's a whole story, but of the Mystere theater. So you're already sitting in here and you're already maybe being confronted with imagery where you're just challenged to be like, what's that map about? Like, they don't explain it. Maybe you're already distracted by that. And then, okay, now we're gonna watch a Chinese pole act. And it's already like a double-decker Chinese, like 2-story tall Chinese pole act. So you're already like, ooh, that's a lot.
Is already happening.
That's a lot to look at.
There's 4 poles. This is crazy.
And then 20 more come down from the back.
Yeah.
And so it really alienated a lot of traditional performers who were just like, Mystere, the Cirque du Soleil stuff, this is nothing, this is some new trend, and it's not connecting on a human level.
It's
and
breaking apart some of the actual, what a lot of people would think was the DNA of what circus is. It's a specific performer coming out to do it, and it's the world famous juggler who can juggle 9 rings, or the world famous aerialist, so here she comes out, or whatever. I mean, it was also happening there a little bit with group acts and circuses in Ringling Brothers and stuff with 20 aerialists. Spectacle. So, but these guys.
Well, I think that's a good point. That's a good point. Like in Ringling, you have the big spectacle, the 3-ring circus, and it's just sensory overload, and you don't know where to look because there's literally 100 aerialists around the arena. Like no joke, it's like 100 people on tissues, and then you have like all the people on the floor, 3 different rings, and you don't know where to look. It's just all over the place around you. But that's some sort of intended spectacle of just overpowering your senses. Whereas in Mystere, like in that Chinese pole piece, I think there is that theatricality implied with Cirque du Soleil. And so then in the theatricality of things...
Yeah, it's a different in kind, not a different in nature. Like, it's not... Like, it's also doing that thing of having lots of performers out, but it's got a different focus and a different intent in it. Or so that's
well. So Franco would say, at least that from what I've seen in his interviews, as he said, I want, no matter where the spectator's eye falls, I want there to be a different picture. I want there to be a different story going on. So and I think that was also just I think a little bit of it in Mystere, because it was really ramped up in Mystere. This kind of extra imagery around all the performing, all the main acts, because it was Vegas. I think they were nervous a little bit. Like, as much as they did take risks and live their dreams and say, whatever, I don't care, I'm just going to do what I want to do, I think there was an element of like, oh no, we're in Vegas. Are they going to watch the Chinese pole act? And what if they look to the side and they're bored? I better put something over there for them to look at. I think there's an element of that.
Yeah.
So he was always like, no matter where the eye goes, there's going to be a new story and a new image to see. Like, it's just, which is a little bit of a Vegas mentality.
Yeah, but it is also Gesamtkunstwerk. It's that the building will be so incorporated that there will be frescoes in the roof for you.
Yeah.
Like if you think of the church as that.
Yeah.
You have Michelangelo painting God given the spark of Adam. So if you're bored by the Latin being spoken, which is similar, because Cirque du Soleil also have a language that nobody understands.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting there, and if you don't understand the story, you can look up and you're going, oh my Lord, look at that. And it's not just a trivial painting either. Like, so you have the map, and you start to think, and is this, am I seeing a relation here? Is it, is that Orion's belt I see in this map?
Right.
And is that connected to the jugglers?
Right.
I don't know. And those are elements, without being immersive in the way that Queen of the Night or whatever is immersive, where you're actually walking around in the building.
Right.
It's immersive in the imaginal realm.
Yes.
Like, all these things that are in here have been put here not for no reason. and maybe there's not going to be a story that's like, oh, this relates to this or whatever. But you get the feeling when you walk into that theater that there is depth wherever you look.
Well, that you just hit it right there. If we talk about Soleil as a brand, at least in the golden era, it was something along the lines of like, I don't know what it all means, and therefore it means something. Like there's this weird thing of like, I paid, back in the day, like $50, which was crazy. Back in the early 90s, I paid $50 for a Cirque du Soleil ticket to go see Saltimbanco.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but it was a significant amount that we spent, yeah.
Yeah, and you go see Saltimbanco and you say, those were amazing tricks. They did amazing jumps on the Russian swing, and they have Chinese pole, the openings of that show as well, and they have the bungee act at the end of the show and all this stuff. And you go, that was amazing, and like I can relate to that in a concrete way. They were hooked up to bungees, they were jumping up and down. I can relate to that. But also there was like the costume imagery, the music, and the vague implied storyline, which all gave you this sense of like, I went through a cultural experience that was heightened and elevated. It wasn't just this crass base level of like people doing acrobatic feats, but it was somehow artistic or elevated or meaningful. But nobody could really explain to you what the story was of Saltimbanco. At least, in terms of when you hear the interviews with the creators and stuff. I mean, I saw Saltimbanco like 10 different times. I can't tell you the storyline other than I can tell you what I've seen in the interviews with the creators. But this idea, I think that's part of their brand, is that Cirque du Soleil became this kind of symbolic, like cultural experience of, I don't know what I just saw. I don't know what that makeup design means, but it must mean something. And therefore I have gone through this experience tonight that has elevated my humanity or, my human experience in this world. And I think they really trade on that. Like Soleil as a brand really kind of trades on this thing of like, we're going to be mysterious, and that mystery is going to make you feel whatever you need to feel, and you're going to pour yourself into it, which I think a lot of different experiences do as well. But Soleil really hinges on this. That's why they have that like gibberish language, right? It's not concrete language, and you kind of go there and you feel there was something happening, but like what it was, like, I don't know.
And it's interesting too, they're using the language, so then they're also becoming a show with no language because they're doing it, but they can use the invocations of language.
Yeah.
So you can't go, and now you kind of know, because of the gestures and the way that they're reacting, you know what it is that's going on.
Yeah.
So in one way you go, that's interesting. They went so deep. They wanted to create their own language, but you can also look at it just going, as a business decision, just let's make no words, but it's a pity to lose language.
Yeah.
Let's use language in a way so the words don't matter. Or somehow.
Yeah.
So it becomes
universal.
Yeah, and I thought about just that, what you were saying there of like a deliberately vague or like the stories that go through these things, which is not straightforward stories, which allows you to look at a whole bunch of imagery and have a feeling like just under the surface somehow there is a story here.
Exactly.
So that you can live yourself into it. But that being different from the way that myths are, because a myth, which is connected to the very start of Mystere as well, like a myth is an actual concrete story with real words. This guy went over there, then that happened, and then he turned into a donkey, whatever.
Yeah.
But you are then invited to read into this, that when the god of sleep meets his sister, which is the god of death, then when they are talking, then we are like getting these, death is related somehow to sleep. And then you get these incredible metaphorical understandings from watching it, from a simple story. But they didn't go for that using words. They go for something which is more in the world of dreams or so their imagery and their stories are not as concrete, and that was their part of their style or whatever.
Which generally works for them. I think generally that technique washes over people in the best of ways. Like you just let it wash over you and you just go, oh, well, I'm getting from this what I get from it. I'm not stressed about it. But some people really do get stressed. Like you go to Yelp and you read the reviews about Mystere or TripAdvisor, and there is occasionally a person will be like, I didn't understand anything. It was so stupid. I hate this show. I went there was a big baby, there was a big snail. I didn't get any of it. So they didn't let it wash over them. They were really looking for the concrete narrative meaning of like, okay, there's a big baby, so now what's going to happen with the baby? And it's like, well, nothing really happens. It's just a character that inhabits this world that you kind of get this imagery from, right? That's like a Franco Dragone style like tactic or technique. And it drives some people crazy. But for the most part, I think people just don't take it so seriously in the way of, they just let it wash over them, and then they go, oh yeah, I feel like something happened, and that's that's enough. But so anyway, so getting back to this again, how the world was back then and how revolutionary the show kind of changed the world. So one thing is in the opening stradivari of the show, like when Mystere starts, there's this stradivari where it's just like all the characters kind of pop out and run across the stage and kind of reveal themselves, and they're kind of introducing themselves in a visual way. And also animating the space, that the space kind of becomes alive, and you start to understand what space this world inhabits. And one thing that happens at the start of the show is the main thrust of the stage, the main platform of the stage, it just starts to sink down into the ground. It just lowers out of sight, which now when I say that to you here in this room today in 2025, sounds pretty anticlimactic. Like, oh, the floor lowered, did it? Oh, cool. But I can't tell you, man, when that happened, it was like the bottom fell out of the world. I don't think it was just me either. It was for sure the first time I had seen a big stage production like that, where the whole stage just disappeared. But I think that people around me too were a little bit like, whoa, like back in 1993, the show opened Christmas 93. It's just like, we hadn't seen that stuff before, especially with circus, because nobody had the money to do stuff like that back then. For sure, if you went to see,
but the sinking stage as well, you can't do that in a show that moves around. And one day it's on this ground, and then it's on the tarmac over here, and then it's on the gravel over there.
It just didn't compute. Like, I can't express to you, like, in my mind, as I sit here talking to you, I can see the Mystere stage. I've seen the show 84 times. I can see the stage. I know where I was sitting in the theater, and I see the stage disappear. And I can't tell you, I know that feeling inside of me, but I can't tell you.
It's super interesting.
Sorry, man. I'm just very sick. Right. So I can right now talking to you, I can see the stage going down, and I know the feeling inside of me I had at that moment when I saw it. It was like a primal fear, because it's something physically. First of all, that stage is huge. So when it lowers, something that massive lowering, it's very visceral. It's like standing at the sea. When the sea is in a storm, you feel your humanity of like, oh, something bad could happen here, or it's a threatening thing. So that whole stage started to lower, and there was like a bit of a vertigo or something, sitting in the seat, watching that stage go down. You're just like, whoa, is the building moving? Like what's happening? I thought I was sitting in my chair. I thought that was a solid surface. For me, something about that, and then you have the grid. It's called the grid in the Mystere Theater, and it's this like circular, like half dome upside down that splits apart, so the big taiko drum can come down. Oh, yeah. And the taiko drum, the fun story is that it's the world's largest taiko drum, and it was so big they couldn't get it into the loading dock. The doors were too small, so they knew this ahead of time, so they had to load in the drum with a crane through the top of the theater before they built the ceiling. It's so big. So imagine that. You're there, you're sitting there. First of all, the bottom of the world drops out and disappears, and then the sky opens, and then the world's biggest taiko drum comes down, and you're just like, what is happening? So that's like one thing that...
And the sound of that, how was that on the first, when they started
playing
the
I mean,
drum?
it's visceral. It's deep. It rattles you, because it's inside you. I mean,
Something interesting in that, which we aren't going to touch on right now, but the fact of what the show might be about, the creation of existence, or
sure,
the birth of life, or whatever. There's something there about it, to me, knowing it and you picturing it out, because I read Dragone talk about it. I have a quote that we can read when we start to talk about it, but it's not that it was nothing. It was less, because nothing, it was not nothing. There was nothing at all. And then the void, you get the feeling of the void as it opens up, and then comes this sound that you can feel shake through you. And in Silmarillion, in Tolkien talks about the original beings singing the world into through the harmonies.
Right.
They sing the world, that the noise of the world brings existence to the universe, or even the thing.
And so just right. So just this opening image. I guess the point I wanted to make now in explaining it to you, I think those things have become ubiquitous. Like, you go to other Cirque du Soleil shows now in town, and it just happens. They have lifts in Mad Apple. Do you come up on a lift?
I don't.
But a lot of people do in the show.
Probably.
And it's
I don't come up because the stand-up comedian act comes up out of that. So
there you go.
That's the
Yeah. So and in fact, there's a shorthand I have with my group of friends, even today, where it's like, we always joke in rehearsal with our little folk circus shows and our little humble, small little creations. We go, and like, where does the Newton cradle come from? Oh, we got to bring the Newton's cradles from over there. Where can they go when we're not using the Newton's cradles? And we always joke and say, well, when we do this show with Cirque du Soleil, of course, they just go into the floor. They just come from the ceiling. It's the hand of God.
Yeah.
That comes from Mystere. That didn't happen with Nouvelle Experience, right? Because it was a touring show. So this is a custom-built theater. And now this level of automation is crazy. I mean, look at the stage design for the Beatles Love Show, which closed this last summer. But that stage was incredible. And look at Ka, the stage on Ka. It's its own character. It's this big, huge moving platform. So that now we've come to expect this level of automation. So to tell you that the Mystere stage lowered and rotated, because it also, besides lowering, it was a big turntable, that was like a revolutionary thing. It just sounds so pathetic in one way. But I'm telling you, at the time, it was unimaginable.
Yeah,
it was crazy.
It's like when in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, then the choir comes in and it sings, and we don't even bat an eyelid. Well, who cares? But you do not have choirs in symphonies. That is not the thing. But he did that, and now we go like, I don't care.
Yeah, you're right.
Then the choir comes in, and you go, have you said the thing that is the point here? No, like we don't, like, who cares with the form of one thing or the other or so, but no animals, and they're doing all these ticking off the list of stuff that you just go, this is not done. This is, what is this? I don't even know how to fully emotionally engage or intellectually engage with this. The stage falls down.
Exactly.
And then later on, you just go, oh, well, look, the stage can go down.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about a little bit in the last episode about a cliche.
Right.
Somebody who has made a strong living from saying, follow your dreams.
Yeah.
Even if I think that's much more complicated than what I can possibly do in that literally 1 minute long talk, because you can, anyway, it's a Hallmark card, follow your dreams. It's a cliche. But at the end of soiree, when we did this and I built that tower, then and said that thing on top, it meant something, and you could hear the original power of the cliche, because it came alive again or whatever. And
No, that's good. That's what you just said there is totally true. So when that stuff happens in Mystere, when I first see it, I don't have the tools to understand what I'm seeing. I can't comprehend it because I don't know how to experience it.
But what you are experiencing is the mystery. You're experiencing Mystere, which is a cliche, but I find it such an interesting thing that that now we're talking about the first time when you actually saw it. Yeah. And you have said many times when we've spoken about this of the thing that you didn't understand the show. Like and this is the beginnings of that. They're like you're sitting had you seen the show before you saw it live?
No. I saw it live the first time. Cool. And because those impressions were so strong, every time I see the show, I still remember those impressions, which is a part of the appeal of seeing it again. Because still, even today, when the stage lowers at the beginning of the show, I'm just like, oh yeah, the stage went down. And remember back in that time, but I have it inside of me. There was other stuff too. So, for example, also in that opening Shalavari, after the stage goes down, then there's a bunch of different things happening. There's other taiko drums coming down from the ceiling around the perimeter besides the big one, and there's these characters called the Lakai, or the archangels, and they're these kind of house troupe members who have these like George Washington wigs on with long braided hair down, white wig down the back of their costume. And they come, and they're normally big acrobats. They're doing like the teeterboard act or whatever. It was Korean plank back when the show opened. And they come and they stand in the aisles, and they stand in the middle of the seats. They kind of inhabit the theater space. And that was
amongst the audience, kind of.
Yeah, exactly in the audience. Like they would stand on the armrest of your chair for the opening kind of movement, and I couldn't believe it. Like it how to describe it? Like, I mean, I was like 16 or 17 years old, and I was terrified of them. I knew they were real people. I knew they were actors or performers. I didn't think they were going to get me somehow. I didn't think they were... It's not like when you're a little kid and you're 5 years old and you go to see somebody dressed up like a gorilla or something, and the gorilla kind of growls at you and you go, "Oh, it's a real gorilla." It's not like that. I knew, like intellectually, I knew these are performers wearing makeup and costumes, right? But emotionally, I was just like, they're right next to me and I don't know what they're going to do. And it was that unknown and just their physical presence and just the physicality of the space, and that they came into the space. It was just a deeper immersion into the whole thing that was just freaking me out. And coincidentally, and what's kind of funny is that there's this documentary where they interview Franco Dragone about making Mystere. And I often like to make fun of this quote because I think it's so silly, but then in looking at this conversation with you, it's actually amazing. So Franco says at one point, he goes, "I told my actors, or my performer," maybe he says actors, I don't know. "I told my actors, when they walk down the street, I want the people on the street to cross over to the other side of the road, to the other sidewalk, because they're afraid of you. I want the audience to be afraid of you," he said in this interview. And I always thought that was like so ridiculous that, like, can you imagine you're some director and like, we're going to go direct a show. It's like a circus show in Vegas or something, you know, it's a Cirque du Soleil show. And then I say to the teeterboard, flyer, and I say, "Hey, you know what? When you're walking down the street tonight after rehearsal, I want people to be afraid of you." Oh. Like, I think that's so insane in one way, that it's so completely outside of reality of meaning. It just sounds very pretentious and stupid. But dude, thinking about it, I was completely terrified of those people when they were in the show, just standing next to me in the audience in the opening of the show. So there was something to it, maybe something to the madness, is what I'm trying to say. There was like something to his madness about this whole thing that did seep through somehow. And that's what I'm always amazed about in terms of Mystere and also other Vegas Cirque du Soleil shows, is that it is part of a big machine, a big business, multi-millions of dollars. This micro-motion juggling piece on the metal shapes in Mystere, somehow the art seeps through, which I don't know, I don't see happening in a lot of other places, like with multi-million-dollar productions. Normally by that point, it's so scripted, it's so dialed down, dialed in, it's gone through so many committees, and there's just been like groups of people, which always kind of kills art, right? Like, and by the time it's distilled down, it's lifeless. Right, like Awakening, I think, in the new show Awakening in the Wind Theater where La Rêve was, it's just unwatchable, I think. But something about like Mystere and O and Ka, there's somehow the art seeps through the multi-million-dollar machine and still exists, like that micro-motion piece and like the hand shadow puppet piece in Ka. There's just these little moments where you go, wow.
Yeah, really interesting, because it's, I haven't voiced it like that, but it's somehow when something costs $30 million, it has lost, somehow the soul is lost. But to be able to keep that, and that was what the magic of those creations, which no doubt was absolutely bonkers, and stories of the director throwing shoes at people. People got like, where it's like it was demented and went all day, all night, and all in, and in every way, every excess of creative madness. But somehow that was so strong that when it was translated into a $30 million building in Las Vegas with all Steve Wynn telling him, "We can't have this, there's not enough applause. You're going to stay on stage and not leave until they stand and have the ovation," whatever it is that the producer is throwing at it. And to somehow, with whatever flaws that the creators of all this have had from their own personal lives or whatever, somehow that artistic image can speak to you so that I have been fully moved by watching these productions in Las Vegas. You do not kind of think that it would happen, or with the company that is Cirque du Soleil.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and so for sure there's been other, like obviously there've been other shows in the world of any genre, including circus, before Mystere that had performers go into the audience. Like obviously I'd seen that growing up watching Shriner Circus or Ringling Brothers Circus or whatever show. It wasn't that, but there was just something about that moment in Mystere, in the context of that piece and that world, that was really unbelievable. I could not believe it, Frodo. It didn't make sense to me that the performers weren't on stage, but they were rather in the audience next to me, because I'm just like, yeah, but they should be on the stage, and why aren't they? And that comes back to that confusion too, that artistic confusion. I'm a teenager, I'm still discovering what it means to perform. What are the rules of performing? And they're breaking a rule, and I can't understand why or how. And also because it's affecting me too, so I know there's a value there. So it's not just to dismiss it. Go, oh, well, they're not being professional. They're not on the stage.
Yeah,
I'm just
that's that thing that we just talked about. That you just said. We can dismiss the stage going down, but when you're in that room and you're sitting there, you go, there is an undeniable power, because you cannot take away my experience of this moment.
Yeah.
And it affected me in this way. And when I came back, it affected me slightly different. But I remember the first one, and it changes as you see it. But there's the undeniability of the emotional experience and the truth of the moment, which is not easy to create. But whenever we talk about it, it's always going to be less than it was.
Right.
When you see me do my act, well, I showed you the family show that we had edited, and as much as it has been filmed with several cameras, and it's a wonderful to put together thing, I feel like, I find it difficult to watch, because it's a show that is in its first iteration. It's like basically like a dress rehearsal or like whatever. So I'm like, ooh, there's so. But also I'm working with my daughter. I'm working with a child, and with my wife, who's neither of them who are performers, and so. But in that moment when it was there, the response that we got from those people, the people who put it on, and all the stuff, it was transcendent.
Yeah.
People felt like they watched something which was
right.
But I also have video of the first time they had Beside Show performed at the Glastonbury Festival, and that's cringing to watch. Right. That had 2,000 people standing ovation, and Haggis MacLeod coming up afterwards. This is the greatest thing that has happened at the in the circus tent at the Glastonbury Festival. I just worked there for 25 years. Because it was this unbelievable thing when we did that, and it's
right on.
Anyway,
no. So then there, a couple other things to touch on from here, which is that just talking about the immersivity. Just made that word up. Of the show, there was also a character. I don't think it was right when the show opened, but a few months afterwards, there's a character called Tony, and Tony was this kind of Charlie Chaplin-looking guy with a big curly black-haired wig with a black top hat and kind of pinstripe black and white suit, and he used to do this transition into Chinese poles where. I had sent you a message about this a few days ago, but I remembered it wrong. I went back and looked at it, and it's even more crazy. So Tony would go into the audience. He was a handstand guy, and he would do some crazy handstand tricks on stage just as a character. Like, again, one of these Franco Dragone images just in the corner, and he's there doing the craziest weird handstand push-up things and one arms and whatever. But as a transition into Chinese poles, he would go into the audience, and he would go up and find a fairly like big looking dude, but who's sitting in their chair, and he would go behind their chair, like in the middle of a row, right? So he's standing in the row behind, so he's basically standing on someone's lap, and he would grab the guy's hands and then pull them up so the guy was straight armed, and the audience guy was straight armed, and Tony would press up into a handstand in the middle of the audience, straight arm to straight arm on an audience member. That he just, there with no instructions. It didn't take long. There was a spotlight on him. He would wind his way through the aisle, grab some dude's hands, pull it up, kind of push down to make sure the arms were, he kind of be, he didn't talk, but kind of be like, make your arms strong. And he would press up into a handstand from there. And then they would have set the Chinese poles on stage to start the act.
Wow.
And just like, but that stuff happened a lot in the show. Like if I remember, especially at the beginning of the show, and as they had all these crazy, amazing performers. That was the other thing, too, about the show when it opened, was they had the top of the top artists of the world. This Carl Baumann, who was the Green Lizard, and Stefan was the Red Bird, and they were going to have Philippe Petit to do Tightwire in the show, which is, so the set design, there's these two green kind of structures on either side of the stage. They're called the mountains. And there's these two drawbridges that kind of lower down. And, it implies, like at the beginning of the show these days, the drawbridges come down and a couple of dancers come out and dance up there or whatever. And there's also Bébé Francois' passage on the drawbridge later on.
Yeah.
But like, you're like, oh, there's a drawbridge there. Like, huh. But, there's how many meters of stage in between, 20 meters separating them. Well, it was going to be that there was a tight wire between the two drawbridges. And the thing is, those mountains on the either side, and the mountains are also where the band is staged on either side. They can move. The mountains physically can move. And that would tension the tight wire. So you can imagine a tight wire spanning that entire, stage without any guy wires or any other rigging, but it was just because the whole structure of the theater would move and tension it. Of course, Philippe Petit never showed up for rehearsal and wasn't in the show, but that's kind of an amazing. But it's also, what I mean is the original artists they had for the show, not only were the ideas ambitious, but they got the most world-class artists in the world to go, which again, to go to Vegas these days is kind of a thing. Like, oh yeah, it's not unheard of that like a really good artist like you would go to work in Vegas and Mad Apple. But back in 1993, oh, you're going to go to work in Vegas doing a Green Lizard character? Like, what? Like, that's not cool. That's not okay to do. So that was also kind of funny. So they had all these wonderful performers as well as these wonderful ideas. And going back to that idea about the format they established that kind of became a formulaic thing and a industry standard, you could say, especially with like the automation of like the stage lift going up and down and the ceiling open, the grid opening up, the sky opening up, and all these things. I remember when I was in Absinthe, like this probably 2018 or something, and I went to see Gwen Stefani at the Zappos Theater there at Planet Hollywood. She was doing a residency, like they do these days in Vegas, and they have these old pop stars do these long runs of shows to cash in on the nostalgia. And I remember going to see Gwen Stefani, and there was like 40 dancers on stage. There was floor-to-ceiling LED panels across the entire back of the stage. There were stage lifts. She was coming in and out of the stage. Did you hear about, it was Jennifer Lopez, I think, who did the Zappos Theater, where she'd be singing a song and then she'd walk over and a foot-sized hole in the stage would just like appear, and she would stick her foot down into the hole and they would change her shoe. And then she'd bring her, so she'd have different like, red high heels on, and then she'd stick her other foot in the hole, and they'd put like, white high heels on her. So she did like a costume change. Like all this stage magic stuff just became, again, ubiquitous and expected. So I'm watching Gwen Stefani and I'm just like, this is kind of boring.
Oh yeah.
I was like, is this concert good? Like, it's okay. Like, I don't know. And then I kind of woke up and was like, what am I thinking? Like, I remembered Mystere in that moment in 2018. I remembered 1993. I didn't see the show until early 1994, but I remembered Mystere, and I was just like, it's become so cliche or expected these days that you go to see a pop concert and there's going to be a floor-to-ceiling video screen, there's going to be 40 people dancing, there's going to be a 10-person live band, that it's become so expected that it's become blasé, it's become invisible, or it's just become ineffective. And I remember Raphael Rosendahl from the Good Point podcast. He's a visual artist doing digital work. And he had a really interesting story where he said, because he would make digital work that would be on the internet. So sometimes at a gallery would want to show it. So he would need to have a video monitor to show the video, whatever stuff he was doing on the wall in the gallery. And he said at first you would have like a, 18-inch monitor, like flat screen monitor, and that tech was unavailable to the general public because it was so cutting edge and it's so expensive. But the art gallery would pay 10,000 euros for this little like flat screen thing. And you would go to the art gallery and you would see his artwork, but you would also be like, wow, that's a really cool monitor. It would kind of impress you a bit into bringing you into the artwork, he said. But then he said, the next year, that monitor is available at your local electronics store for €1,000. So not everybody could have it, but you could maybe buy it for your home. So he would have to get a bigger screen for the art gallery the next year, and a bigger screen the next year, and a bigger screen the next year to keep impressing the audience with the tech. And that's what I remembered about Gwen Stefani's show. It was just like, we've come to like peak saturation of this tech, of like having it impress me, because I'm just like, well, I don't have a floor to ceiling video screen at home, but like I've seen it every time I go see a show now. And so it's so blasé. And that's a little bit, just in relationship to Mystere, you see that arc then of just technology creeping into shows and into our daily lives, and how that affects our experience of that live experience. So there probably was an element in Mystere of the lighting and the automation when I first saw the show, where I'm just like, I've never seen tech do that before. And there's a really fun, like another fun story about that is, I guess a lot of the rigging they did in Mystere, there was some really truly innovative rigging, which I don't know about rigging at all, but they have quite a lot of elements coming in and out of the ceiling in the show. Like I said, around the audience with the taiko drums in the beginning of the show, there's the bungee act, there's a bunch of other stuff happening during the show. And so apparently they had gotten a bunch of like crazy like rock climbers out at Red Rock, like in Vegas, right? So they had all these people doing rock climbing who knew cutting edge rigging techniques with ropes and stuff. So when they opened the show in '93, they had a team of like 27 of these riggers like to run the whole show. But then, like I said, the show's 31 years old. So as the show went on, even 10 years later, a lot of that rigging they had done by hand, there were now machines that would do it. But of course, it's like a kind of a union contract where they're like, well, we're employing 27 riggers, so we could take this one little electronic box and replace 12 of those people, but we're not going to, because then we're going to cut all those jobs. And so that technical aspect of Mystere is also pretty interesting to think about, that you're going to run a show for 31 years. And the tech that was new in 1993 is now, you're not using any tech that you had in 1993 now, but there was this kind of, this process and this journey of not just like, well, let's just take the cheapest option, or even the most secure option, or the most updated option. It was just like, well, we don't want to cut these people from them having a job, so we're going to keep doing this kind of archaic rigging from 10 years ago every single, twice a night to save their jobs. The show did just go under, they just had a big refresh on the lights a few months ago, because all of the lighting instruments, they don't make them anymore. They were using incandescent bulbs. You can't buy them anymore because they don't make them anymore. And so they had to do LED lighting on the whole show. And so Luc Lafortaine, who did the original light design, he came back 30 years later and redid the lights and put all the new LED bulbs in and redid the light design. And there was a nice interview with him about that, and he was saying like, yeah, I came to see the show and I see the mistakes I made when I was a kid doing, because in his mind, he's 30 years younger back then, and he's one of the first shows of his career, I'm sure. He had done Soleil up to that point, but like, he's
not
a young,
in a purpose-built theater where you can say, I want the light that comes.
He's a young dude.
He's
a young dude. So he said, I was looking at the light design I made back then, and like I wasn't embarrassed, but I was like, look how naive I was back then. Side note, the new light design is horrible, and almost, it's brutal, because LED lights, they can't do dim very well. And so Mystere literally meant, mystery. The show was lit kind of darkly and very mysteriously, and nowadays when you go see the show, it looks like I call it like an Easter parade. Like these new LED lights, I just think it looks garish. It's just completely different vibe and everything. It looks terrible. But anyway, it's the passage of time. Again, like...
Yeah, new technologies. But I've had that too, where I've been looking at movies, and there's some of those, I can't remember which reboot of the Batman franchise, but just having that feeling that I'm seeing, this looks weirdly, because it's so HD and the lights are so I don't know what, but it's starting to look cheap again, like television, Turkish soap operas or whatever. I'm like, why can I can see too much here? Something has happened where I haven't, because you can argue that certain kinds of art or certain kinds of things do well with being a little bit like theatre or whatever, being a little bit dark and so. But what certainly lives in the shadows is mystery.
Yeah.
So when the lights are coming up, it's it's the book in praise of shadows, a Japanese book on the Japanese aesthetic of a bowl standing on a table that is, but it's meant to be looked at in half light or whatever, light coming through paper windows, all this sort of stuff of how that actually changes the nature of what used to be the most beautiful thing. You can't see the beauty now because you got a bright incandescent light on it, and now we need shiny surfaces. Everything needs to be smooth and pretty or whatever.
Well, in terms of Mystere and lighting and mystery, one really terrible, I think in my mind, the worst offense has been that, so the back wall used to look like a void, just like a black void. And until I ever had like a backstage tour, I couldn't discern the actual physicality of the theater space. It just looks like it goes on infinitely. But in reality, so there's a set element in the show called the sky, and it's this huge structural element covered with tension with cloth that they do projections on in the sky, low raises and lowers and everything. But in essence, the sky actually covers the back wall. The back wall is right there behind the sky. But because it was never lit, it just looks like a black void of infinity. And that's also why, again, when I went to see the show the first few times, I couldn't comprehend it. I literally couldn't discern the physical space we were in. I didn't know where it started and stopped. But now with the new LED light design, the light spills so badly because it's so bright. You just see it's painted. The back wall is painted black. You just see the wall, and you go, we're in a room. Now we're in a room suddenly instead of we're in a magical world that's infinite or whatever. So that's been like one.
But they warp space. The showman warp space and they warp time. So but anyway, that's really interesting.
Right. I mean, I wanted to say a couple other things because this video screen analogy I think is kind of, I don't know why I find it fascinating, but there was I wanted to give a little bit of a view again, because what I'm trying to establish is like, how was the world back then? And like, how can we comprehend what Mystere meant to the world then? And like then therefore what it means to the world now. So another thing that was happening back then was if we just look at video screens, it was U2 Zoo TV, which was one of the most iconic set design, rock tour set designs ever made. And a couple of fun things happened on Zoo TV. I mean, one was it was made with Mark Fisher, who's one of my favorite like architects of like set designs, and he also made the Ka. He made the Ka Theater set design. It was Mark Fisher. He had a design firm called Fisher Park. He did a bunch of stuff for Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd back in the day and all these things. But on Zoo TV, he invented the B stage. And the B stage, again, is one of these things that we take for granted today. But the B stage is the little stage in the middle of the crowd, in the middle of the arena, with a little small catwalk from the main stage, which is on the end of the arena. And then at one point, the band walks this whole little catwalk. So all those fans who weren't on the front row anymore, they suddenly become the front row. Like the front row has been redefined. And so the band walks the catwalk and they do a little acoustic set and this little like 4x4 meter stage in the middle of the crowd. So it's a 360-degree thing, right? And this concept of the B stage became nowadays the entire concept of pretty much every rock concert tour. In fact, most stages these days don't even have a main stage. They only have B stages in the middle of the crowds, and the band pops up in different locations all over the arena to be immersive and all this and that. So that's happening, around the same time as Mystere. And also then that idea that like Zoo TV, it still used real TVs basically. Like they literally made a set design out of TVs, like with the tubes, the big heavy TVs. And then later on, U2 had the biggest TV screen in the world on Pop Mart 1997, and that they had pioneered that technology of like floor to ceiling, wing to wing, like LED panel. That was like, and how expensive was that back then? Because they were the first ones who made it happen. They had to figure out how to build it. And now that technology has just become ubiquitous everywhere. Yeah. And so, I don't know. There's something.
It's really interesting to try as well to paint that picture of just how bad it was. Not just how bad it was, to paint a picture of just how revolutionary it was, both in what they were doing on stage, but also then in how, you got affected as an audience. Well, maybe we'll wrap up here and we'll do another session. We'll go and drink some warm drinks, because I know you always like to have a nice hot strong coffee. No, I'm just joking with you here. But anyway, maybe we'll wrap this up and we'll continue on, because this is just like it always is. There's so much more to say, and this whole aspect of that you come up with in this conversation, it's like of trying to put people into that frame of mind of when before this existed. 1993, that is a long time ago. Key things happened in my life at that time. It was like, and formative years of us, and then this show happened. So let's continue the exploration. Thanks so much for sharing all of this.
Oh yeah, I'm into it.
Thanks for coming along for this sojourn along the way of the showman. It's been a pleasure having you here, and I hope you tune in again next week, because this is now a weekly podcast for the whole of this month. So please tune in as we continue to delve deeper into Mystere. And until then, please subscribe and take care of yourself and those you love. And I really hope to see you somewhere along the way.